everyone, it's Jessica, and this is another edition of Raleigh Rambles, where I process something that I'm thinking out loud and share it with all of you. Today I want to talk about the BFC 530 chat topic this morning, which was how do you engage in conversations of race and justice with students and with colleagues? And I thought that it was a really good conversation. I was really excited that Julia Sweeney put this topic into the queue, and it was really great to see the community engaging in this conversation. A few things that I noticed and a few things that I'm thinking about after this conversation. One of them is that it seemed like there were actually several people who felt really I don't want to say like honored or validated, but it seemed like it was really something that to have this be the topic this morning, it was really important to them. And there was almost this feeling of like, oh, thank you for bringing this up. Thank you for being a chat that talks about this. Not that there aren't other, education chats that talk about these kinds of topics, but it just seemed like people were really just thankful and grateful that we had this space to have that conversation. And so I'm thinking a lot about how do we, not just in BFC and on Twitter, but in a lot of different spaces, how do we continue to make the space for those conversations? Because on the one hand, I think that we should just be having these conversations as much as possible, but I also know that it's not something that always comes up for people, and it's not always something that people feel comfortable bringing up. And so how do we help support those conversations? I think it's in making the space for them and for almost, like having a prompt or having a reason to talk about it in that time and space. And so that's one of the things that I'm kind of thinking about this morning is how do we make space for these important conversations and open that dialogue more widely. Another thing that I noticed is that a lot of people got kind of quiet, and it seemed like people didn't know what to say or didn't know what their entry point was to the conversation. Something that I heard from a few people in looking back through the chat from the Eastern time and the Central time zones, there were a few people who were talking this morning about how, well, it just comes up naturally. One of the teachers actually here in Denver was saying, well, we don't really have to broach these topics because the kids bring them up and the kids want to talk about it. It's something that's important to them. It's on their mind. They want to share it. And when they give that little nugget of, inclination that that's something they want to talk about, like we jump on those opportunities and we take them, very seriously, and we have that dialogue. And I think that's amazing. And I feel really grateful to live in a city where there are schools that are in that situation. So many of our schools have a lot of diversity, and that's in students and families as well as in the staff members who are in the building. But I also think that there are a lot of schools in our district and in many other districts where that's not the case, and they don't have as much diversity. And something that people were saying this morning was, well, someone said, we're like 98% white in our school, students, staff, families, and so how do we have those conversations? Because it doesn't necessarily come up, but it's almost more important. People were kind of saying, like, in those situations, it's actually more important to talk about white privilege. It's more important to have conversations, and not that that's necessarily more important than anywhere else, but like, you have to be having those conversations. And how do you do that in a way that feels authentic and meaningful and organic and not forced or trite? But it's not going to just sort of fall in your lap is kind of what I was hearing from some people. Like, it's not just the opportunities aren't just going to present themselves, you have to create them. That's a better way of saying it. And so we got talking a lot about, what are some ways that you can give kids and colleagues and yourself an entry point to the conversation, and how do you seek out information that you can use and content that can be of value to starting those conversations. I think one of the things that's been really important for me since I sort of, really got passionate about this topic is just listening to other people and different perspectives and seeking out content and information. Finding videos. There's a great TED Talk by Melody Hobson that I really like, and I keep coming back to it because it really it was good food for thought for me. And there are some really great articles, not just about race and diversity overall, but there are a lot of things that are being written about specifically those topics in education. And so finding those kinds of things, finding even just really great role models for your kids. Someone was talking about the importance of kids being able to be exposed to a lot of different perspectives, and one of the ways that you can do that is to bring people into your classroom. Someone brought up, like, that's all fine and well, but like, how do I do that meaningfully, and how do I find the right people? Especially in our community, we don't have a lot of people of color who I can reach out to. Well, what a great opportunity for video conferencing, using a Google Hangout or Skype, whatever it is. And even if that's using some of the channels where people are connecting for mystery hangouts, you don't have to structure it like a mystery hangout, but how amazing would that be to you're studying biology and you're able to find a biologist who can come and talk to your kids about that. Why not go sort of that extra step and try to find a person of color who can talk to your kids and who can kind of show them and represent sort of the content and be an expert in the content that you're studying, while also bringing, just more awareness. I think that's where we start with kids a lot of times, is just awareness. And, I know growing up in Maine, there were not very many people of color anywhere around me. And, it's predominantly white. And another great thing that we were talking about, actually, that I have been thinking about too, is that, white privilege sometimes is something that people get a little bit defensive about, or they start to say, well, white privilege is one thing, but there are a lot of white kids who aren't privileged. They don't have a lot of money, or they're in a low socioeconomic situation, or, they have violence going on in their house. Like, yes, absolutely. Those things are things that face people, not just of color, but white people too. But that's not really what white privilege is. And so even just like unpacking what does white privilege mean, and how can you have these conversations without getting defensive? Like, it was just a really interesting to hear everybody's different perspectives, and I feel like I have all these different little nuggets of things that I need to dig in really deeply with and think about a lot more. But like growing up in Maine, I am white, and that was pretty much what I was exposed to. And we definitely were in a low, SES kind of situation. And, I did not have a lot of money, and we did not have a lot of things. And it was a struggle. Our life was a struggle in a lot of ways. But that doesn't mean that white privilege did not play a role in my childhood and in my life thus far. Thinking about going to school and getting a good education and being able to go to college and being able to choose which colleges I'm going to. Like, all of those things are wrapped up in that conversation. And so I guess it's just a matter of thinking about what that means for me personally, and also thinking about what that means in terms of how we continue to talk about the importance of even just defining what we're talking about. We had a great conversation about the word tolerance. Some people shared some resources from I think it was tolerance.org, and there were a couple others that got shared. And I've read some things in the past where people talk about how the idea of tolerance is actually misguided, and that by saying that we want to, like, by focusing on tolerance and by teaching kids about tolerance and making that sort of the focal point of the conversation, and using that language, we actually are, that's really condescending. And some people have talked about how it sends the message that there's not a need for mutual respect, and that it's actually perpetuating a lot of the problems. And so we got talking about the importance of just defining, like, what does that mean, and how do we make sure that we're choosing our language appropriately, but also not being afraid to just jump in and have the conversation. Like, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword there, because so many people are afraid to use the wrong word or to say the wrong thing, and because it's not part of their vocabulary and it's not part of their it's not something that they know how to discuss, sometimes they just choose not to. And I think that was the biggest thing that I got out of this morning, and that I've been thinking about lately, is how do we continue to have these discussions, and then how do we act on them? Because talking about them is really important, and I think that's the first step, but it can't end there. And I worry that a lot of people sort of end it there, like, oh well, I talk about it, so that means I'm doing something about it. Like, well, that's one piece of it, but we really do need to be acting on it. We need to then take those conversations to our kids, or go to our administrators and say, this is something that I don't know how to talk to my kids about, but I know it's important and I want to. I need some learning opportunities as a staff member in your building to be able to have these conversations. And how do we want to approach this with students, and what kinds of opportunities are there for us to learn together as a community? Like, I think those are all really great next steps that we can act on and seek out. I sort of started asking people this morning, do you have PD in your building that's focused on these conversations? And a lot of people said no. One perspective which I actually really liked was, whenever we do, because we have a very diverse population, and most of our teachers were drawn to this school for a reason, because we're so passionate about diversity and equity and making sure that these kids are being served and taken care of, that it actually was kind of belittling, or she said it was frustrating, because the PD and sort of the training that they got was something that they already know and understand, and it almost was a slap in the face to them. How dare you come in and try to train us on these topics when we live it every day? And so that also got me thinking about how you can't just say, oh, we're offering this on the schedule. Like, the way in which you approach it is so important, and you really need to honor everybody's entry points and talk about people's biases and assumptions, and make sure that there's a safe space to do it. If you are in a building that does not have a good staff culture, it would be really hard to have these conversations. So, it's hard to have them anyway, but especially in those kinds of buildings, I think it would be really tricky. So that's just kind of what I'm thinking about right now. I know that this is a quite a long one, and I warned you in the title, it was a ramble, but it's such a complex conversation, and it's something that I'm really becoming very passionate about. I'm so thankful that we were able to start that conversation this morning in BFC 530, and so many people said thank you for this conversation, and I really have a lot to think about now. And for me, like, that's a win. If people walk away thinking about something more deeply and taking it into consideration as they go about their day, that I think is a true win. And I'm just so thankful that I have people in my PLN who I can have this conversation with. A few people said that as well, and I echo the sentiment, and that I'm doing my best to try to continue to keep finding places to have this conversation and to share what I'm thinking about it. And I know that that's it's scary sometimes for me, even like just the thought of posting this, and I think a lot of us worry like, oh, we don't want to offend anybody, and my breadth of knowledge is really not where I would like it to be yet, and that's why I'm continuing to learn and grow. But I also acknowledge that this is just sort of where my journey is starting, and I want to continue to grow in this area, and there's no better way to do that than to put these kinds of things out there and to keep talking about them and sharing my thinking. So that's what I'm thinking. I really, really would love to hear from you. If you want to answer in the comments, or create your own video, if you want to chime in on BFC 530 using the hashtag, I would really like to know where do you begin with conversations about race and equity with students and teachers and family members, whoever it is who you might have these conversations with, and I would love to hear your thoughts and additional resources too. If you have really great resources that we can share among one another, I would really like to see those as well. So thank you for listening if you've made it this far, and I hope that everybody has a wonderful day. I will talk to you all very soon.